Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us here on New Canadians. This is a special tribute to Syrian refugees in Canada. My name is Daryl Pinto, and I'll be one of tonight's co-moderators. Tonight's event will be split into two segments. We're going to start first with a panel of 5 refugees who arrived in Canada in 2015 and 2016 and listen to their lived experiences. Then at 8 o'clock, we're going to switch to a second panel to hear 4 Canadians reflect on Canada's acceptance of 25,000 Syrian refugees. This session is brought to you by New Canadians, a TV and web-based series for newcomers to Canada. You can visit their website at newcanadians.tv or their YouTube channel, where this session is currently being live streamed. Through its digital platforms, New Canadians informs and educates newcomers and immigrants about settlement, education, employment resources, and services that help them with their journey here. You can also watch New Canadians every week on Omni Television across Canada. I do want to remind the audience that this is an interactive event, and I encourage you to type your questions via the Q&A tab on Zoom or the live chat box if you're watching on YouTube. You can also vote for questions that you like. The more votes a question gets, the more likely that it will be asked by the moderators to the panelists. Now, I'm really thrilled to introduce the moderator of our first segment, Bayan Khatib, Executive Director of the Syrian Canadian Foundation. Her family came to Canada as political refugees from Syria when she was a little girl. Subsequently, when the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011 and forced over 5.6 million people to flee the country, and just to put that in context, that's a population almost equal to Toronto. So when 5.6 million people fled the country and many of them arrived here in Canada, it galvanized her and her friends to start helping. She has been demonstrating her passion for building inclusive communities ever since. Over to you, Bayan. So Bayan, you probably want to unmute.
Thank you, Daryl, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Bayan Khatib. Like Daryl said, I'm the Executive Director of the Syrian Canadian Foundation. I would like to introduce you today to our panelists for the first segment of today's event. So we have with us today Talar Chitjian from Toronto, Roula Kikhia from Ottawa, Saeed Alzoubi from Halifax, Hanen Nanaa from Toronto, and Mathew Vitale from Calgary. We're going to start off today with some rapid fire questions. So to get us warmed up, I will be asking you some quick questions, and I'll ask you that you give us a very quick response, a short answer. So we'll start with you, Roula. What was your favorite subject in school?
Math, as I remember, yeah.
Talar, favorite subject in school?
Yes, math as well.
Wow.
Math and physics.
Okay. Saeed?
I like the geography and history.
Okay. Hanan?
I hated math, but I like.
Which subject? Oh, you're muted, Hanan.
English, sorry.
Okay. And Mathew?
I would say math as well, but now it's definitely psychology and university.
Okay. Okay, second question. In which city do you live, and what 3 words would you use to describe your city? We'll start with you, Saeed.
I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Halifax is a really beautiful city. It's a smaller downtown, but
Tell us 3 words. So beautiful, small, and one more.
Oh, okay, and natural.
Okay, thank you. Mathew?
I would say calm, clean, and safe.
And that's which city?
Calgary.
Calgary. Calm, clean, and safe. Okay, Talar?
Yes, Toronto, it's beautiful, it's busy and so crowded.
Thank you. Roula.
Ottawa, family-oriented, quiet. Not a lot of social life though, comparing with Mississauga, Toronto. Yeah.
Hanan.
So I live in Scarborough, the east end of Toronto, and I would say safe, inclusive, and good food.
Ooh, okay. Okay, next question. Something you wish you could be good at. Talar, we'll start with you.
Yes, I have only one thing I wish I could have done in my entire life. This only thing is to play piano. So yes, this is my only wish that I couldn't have the chance to realize it.
Okay, Mathew.
It's close, but mine is singing. I wish I was a good singer. I'm not, and I love singing.
Roula.
Gym, commitment.
Okay.
To use my registration card actually and really use it. Go to
Yes,
gym.
a lot of us have that dream. Hanan.
I would relate to the arts as well. I wish if I had a talent, but I'm not good at arts.
So which artistic talent do you wish you had?
Anything. I like painting, but I am not good at it. So I like watching people paint.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Saeed.
I dance and I play music, but I wish I can sing.
Nice. Okay, next question. If you could make a documentary about anything, what would it be? We'll start with you, Hanan.
Wow. About women in politics.
Nice.
Yes.
Mathew?
That's a hard question. There's a lot of things that I want to make documentaries about, but I would say I would give the most insight about a documentary regarding refugee experience.
Okay. Talar?
About human rights for sure. I have deep expertise in that. So yeah, I would have done that.
Okay. Saeed?
So I'm studying my dream, so I'm doing international development. I love doing I wish I can do more better in the community development. So
Okay, and Roula?
I would say also any documentary related to children rights, crisis affected children, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for sharing the topics that are close to your hearts. And our last rapid fire question is, tell me one Arabic word you wish everybody in Canada knew because you just can't translate it. And then also do your best to try to translate it because you have to explain the meaning to the audience too. Okay, who wants to start? Saeed?
there's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
I can't really think of one, but let's say when you tell somebody anta ruhi, it's not like someone telling someone oh you're my soul. It has deeper meanings for me, at least. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the ruhi is a word of endearment in Arabic, and it's hard to translate because technically it kind of means soul, but it's way more than that. Thank you, Saeed. Roula.
تكرم عينك. I really don't know how to say that.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough, but you gotta try. How would you explain it?
I would just use, the English version of it, I don't know, even like you're welcome or.
You're welcome.
No, yeah, I'm just thinking now what I would use.
Yeah.
See, that's why it's really hard.
So the technical definition is something like
your eyes are
generosity, like I wish to give more generosity to your
yeah.
eyes. Something like that.
People would understand this as well.
Yeah, but it's basically a welcome, like you're welcome, but that's so weak. Yeah, good one, Roula. Hanan?
The word is tfaddal. So I struggled at the beginning because like my parents also use the word a lot. So when my neighbors come here and when we serve them, let's say coffee, we say tfaddal, and like it's a way of saying like go ahead, but it's completely different. So I still didn't find the exact translation to that word, but I still use it. No, but I taught my neighbor to say tfaddal, so now they say it to me.
It's basically a very polite way to say, here you go, take.
Exactly. Or like your coffee.
Right. Talar?
Yes. So when I would say minayuni, so when someone asks us like to do a favor, so we say minayuni, but like there is no specific translation in English words. So it means basically like for sure somehow like related to that kind of expression, but it's not the exact expression.
And the technical meaning is minayuni, from my eyes.
Yeah, but like it's nonsense. If you translate it to English, it becomes nonsense.
There's a lot of eye imagery in the Arabic language.
Exactly. Eyes and hearts.
Yes. And Mathew?
Okay, I think about this a lot, and the word that I would choose is tarab. I guess the best way to explain what it means is sort of the infatuation or a feeling of euphoria that you get from listening to music. That's sort of, I don't know if I said that right, but that's how I think about it. Yeah. I wish that, you know, people who don't speak Arabic could learn that word because I think it's so beautiful.
So that's so true. I translated a book once upon a time, a long time ago, and I realized that it takes so many more words in English to say one word in Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is one of the struggles that we have, right, guys, in our integration stories. Okay, so now we'll move on to our questions. And the first question that I have for you today is, how has the Syrian crisis impacted you and your family? And why was it that your family had to leave Syria? Roula, can we start with you?
Sure. So I left Syria in 2013, and the reason why I left has not changed yet, though, in Syria. So since 2011, more than 226,000 civilians, including 29,000 children, have died as a result of the conflict, injustice, and indignity in Syria. 6.5 million are internally displaced in Syria, and 5.6 million are registered refugees in neighboring countries. So the crisis has not ended yet. Syrians still face an economic crisis. Food prices are 20 times higher than their pre-conflict levels. So as of 2020, an estimated 9.3 million people in Syria, more than the half of the current population, are food insecure. Violence against women and girls increased by the economic crisis. So 10 years of conflict, 1 year of COVID pandemic, and large scale of displacement throughout the country increased the negative coping mechanism such as child marriage and child labor. The children have experienced psychological distress because of the violence, instability, being separated from their parents, forced to leave their homes, or seeing their loved one killed. So all of this impacted not only myself or my family, but also every single Syrian family in and outside of Syria. So today, these families are facing impossible choices about their futures.
Thank you so much, Roula. That's very important to share because a lot of people still think that the war is over or the crisis is over, but Syrians are actually struggling more than ever today.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. Mathew, would you like to answer that question as well?
Sure. I mean, Rola put it perfectly. There's not really much to add about the why, but the first part of the question you said, how has it impacted my family? So I can talk a bit more about that. I'll talk about my immediate family first, or just my immediate family for now. I think the worst it was for my parents and my brother, because when when the war started, I was only 10 years old. So I kind of grew up in the war, and I didn't really, realize its impacts until, we left, and I looked at how people live here. I'm like, oh, this is completely different from what I used to. But for my parents and my older brother, it was a lot more difficult for them. My dad lost his job because he worked at a pharmaceutical company, and ISIS took over their factories. So he was out of a job for a while. And my mom couldn't work at the hospital anymore. She's a gynecologist, and she would always go at night to do surgeries and stuff like that. And so she couldn't do that anymore because it wasn't safe for her to travel even to the hospital, even like a short distance, because we lived in a bad neighborhood. So, and my brother was in medical school, and he missiles hit his university a couple of times. So, after that, we decided that, okay, we have to leave no matter what. And it impacted him a lot. His whole life now he had to go back and start from his undergraduate degree again. And now he's finally applying to medical schools. But yeah, they all lost so many years of their lives because of the war. And it was a lot easier for me, like I said, because I was younger. But that's how it has impacted my family, and that's also why we had to leave.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mathew. Talar?
Yes, I would highlight some other aspects of the impact that the Syrian crisis had on all of us. So for me, it mainly affected my career, I can say, although it affected the other aspects of my life as well. So I was practicing law in Syria for more than 4 years. I was perfectly happy with my job. I was running a successful business. My biggest dream was about to realize. I was looking to purchase a proper office to practice the job that I was in love with, practicing law. But Syrian crisis had arisen, and my life became topsy-turvy. The situation was worsening day after day. The court was bombed. I wasn't seeing any light at the end of that dark tunnel. I was cautious. I made the decision to postpone my dream, having the fear of uncertainty. Indeed, that was one of the most right decisions I have ever made in my life. The counter situation was worsening, and I'm sure all my friends would agree with me. The people's utmost wish was to provide the fundamentals of staying alive and escaping the mortar shells that were raining all over the country. At that moment, I made the decision of leaving Syria. In addition to all the nightmare that I was living in, inflation was remarkably affected as well, and the fruits of all my hard work were turned to a null. So I'm talking about the financial aspects that the crisis had on my life. I'm thankful that I made the right decision to not expanding my business at that very specific time. This is just one side of my life.
Thank you for sharing that, Talar.
Thank you.
Saeed, what was it how did the crisis impact your family?
So we were like, I'm from Dara, like the place that started everything in, and we were like the first people who get like the bad side of the things. And so at the beginning it was everything okay, like we say like, oh, it's all right, it's gonna be ending like soon, like 1 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months. Nothing happened, and then at the end of it, like after at least 6 months, we had like a really bad timing, which is like I lost over 6 of my friends, 2 of my family members, and my dad made the decision of like we have to leave. And then at that time, like he was just thinking about it. And then like there was the bad thing about it, which is like the women and what they're doing with them. And like I don't want to go like really specifically with that, but it was like my dad was really like I have sisters, I have my mom, and I have my siblings. I was the oldest. I was 14, and all of my siblings were like just really young, and we cannot just stand that anymore. And then at like the last week, I lost my uncle. Um, And then my dad decided to leave, just like we have to leave, and then we left to Jordan. It was really tough time, but the why, I think Roula and Mathew covered most of it. Really thankful for you guys. Yeah, that was the first decisions we made to leave Syria, and yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Dara is a very special city because, like you said, that's where it all started. The whole uprising in Syria started with children writing anti-government slogans on their school walls, and then those children were arrested and they were tortured, and then the town was upset and they protested, and that broke out all the other protests across the whole country, and that's what led to the crisis. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Hanan?
Oh my God, being the last one is like, oh, what did I say now? I think my fellow speaker covered everything, and I'm just so inspired how strong they are going through these traumatizing experiences as I did as well. I would say the impact is like the majority of Syrians was, of course, we were impacted by the violence, which means again killing and destroying our houses, and when we say killing our loved ones, our friends and neighbors, but also the displacement was a big part of my journey. Because at that time, I want to share a personal experience. At that time, I was writing my exams for my grade 9 class. And in Syria, the system is different. So if you fail your, let's say, grade 9, you have to repeat again. You can't go to grade 10. So it's a big exam that you have to prepare to. And then I had to move because of the crisis. I had to move to another city, and I was only allowed to take my mom with me to the exam. And I went to the exam court, and I was writing Arabic. Arabic is the official language. So if you failed, you failed the year. So I was writing at that time my exam, and then I heard people yelling and screaming, and something was bombed. And then I wanted to see my mom, if she's safe, what's going on. Like, I don't know what's going on outside. They didn't allow me to go and see my mom. And imagine being stressed during the exam, and then like you don't know what's going on outside and if my mom is safe or not. I was writing and tearing on my papers, and to this moment I still don't know how I passed that exam. But after that experience, my dad knew that it affected my mental health, and not only me, my siblings as well. And also at that time, my mom was diagnosed by cancer. She was taking chemotherapy, and they bombed the hospital, so she wasn't able to continue her treatment. So we decided to move to Turkey. And it wasn't a pleasant experience to move to even to the neighbors countries, because we had to run to those countries. My parents, my siblings and I, we crossed borders with no passports at night. So it was a horrible experience that I will never forget. And I remember on that day, I was packing up my books and my clothings and everything. And my mom told me, hey, we're going for 3 months, don't take everything with you. And I believed what she said. And since that time until today, I've never been back to my country, and it's almost 10 years. And yeah, that was my journey.
Oh man, that's a lot for a young girl in grade 9 to experience. Thank you all for sharing your personal experiences with us. I would like to ask you now about the day that you found out that you were coming to Canada. Where were you? How did you find out? How did you feel that first moment where you found out that you got accepted to come to Canada? Roula, would you like to?
Yeah, so well, I was in Turkey with my husband, and we waited for that almost for 13 months. The officer who interviewed us, her name was Lisa. So we used to sing like, Lisa, please give us the visa. Yeah. So at that day, my husband came to pick me up from my work, and he told me that I have a bad news and good news. So okay, I told him, just start with the bad news. I've already had a very horrible day. And he said, I think you should resign from your job. You can't stay anymore. I said, why? What? And he said, because we're going to Canada within 2 weeks. And I was like, how comes? I mean, what happened? He said, I just got the phone call from the embassy, and they said that we can go within, like, we only have 2 weeks to pack our stuff and then prepare ourselves to travel. And yes, that was a great moment. And we were in the car. I can even remember, I mean, the time, the people around us, like all the all the situations is still in my mind because yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Roula. Mathew?
So I had somewhat of a similar experience because the time that we had, it was actually less than it was 5 days. So they called us. We were in Lebanon, and my parents got the call and they said we're leaving, and I was like, okay, when? I expected at least 2 to 3 a month. That's what we expected. And they said, oh, we're leaving on Wednesday. And I was like, what? You can't be serious. And they're like, yeah, we're leaving on Wednesday. So I had to say goodbye, and none of my friends knew. I didn't tell any of my friends that we even applied. So I had to say goodbye to all of my friends and my family in 4 days.
Oh
So
my
it was crazy. It was crazy. Yeah.
Wow, that is fast. I can't imagine doing that in 4 days. Saeed?
Coming together was a long experience for me. So they called us, they called my dad over 3, 4 times, and he didn't pick up for like a long time. And then like he was just like, oh, I don't know who's that number for. I'm not gonna pick up, it's fine. And then he was like, I'm just gonna pick up and see who is that. And then like, oh, we're from the Canada's community, and we would like to invite you for a phone call tomorrow at 6 a.m. And he was like, what's going on? And they're like, Canada is like, who's calling me from Canada? And then like after that, they called him, and and he said like he said yes, like just right away from the first question.
Had
And
he applied? Had he applied to go to Canada?
no, no, we
No,
did not apply now.
no, they just called him to invite him.
Yes, they
Wow.
just called him to invite him. Yes. And then like they just took a long process with him, like asking him questions and like what are you doing, what are your kids doing, your wife, and how is life and things like that. And then he explained everything. The second day, like he did not tell anyone the first day. The second day he came and we were like just eating dinner, and he was like, we have an interview next month on the date blah 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 for an interview for going to Canada. And I was like, what, are you serious? And then and then I just refused. I kept refusing. Yeah, I didn't want to come at all.
Which country were you in?
I was in Jordan.
Jordan,
I
okay.
was in
So you
Jordan.
refused.
Yes, I refused to come to Canada. I was thinking about the way is I'm already 3 hours driving from my city, from
Mm,
Syria,
mhm.
like from my Syria from my city. And then I was like, if I go, and it's gonna be like at least 12 hours in the airplane, and it's like in the second part of the world. How can I see my friends? I only came here for like couple 3 months. I'm already here for 3.5 years. And like, how can this go? And then like I refused for like over 2 weeks, and then actually a Canadian woman, called me with a translator on the phone, and she started explaining things for me. You're gonna study. You're gonna find your job, your
She
dream
told you,
job.
not your dad, to convince you.
They couldn't convince me because I was the only one who refused, and I was actually gonna go back to Syria and let them go by themselves because my
And
family already
we were
confirmed.
this close to losing you.
Yes, and then after that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have a chance. Like, I'm only gonna go for a year. And they
Mm.
were like, okay, you can go for a year, try it. If you don't like it, I swear to God, you'll go back, and like, it's fine, everything is good. I was like, sure. And I came with like, we came here within 2 months, like only 2 months after they called us.
And how long have you been here now?
I've been here for since 2016, February 2016.
Okay, so the 1 year passed and you're still here.
Yeah,
So
the
everything's
fourth year
good.
passed as well, and yeah, see,
Everything's
yeah, life just changed for me, like changed a lot. I got a lot of motivation, and I had zero chance to go nowhere with studying because I couldn't study. They didn't let me study for like a long time, and here I am. I'm doing my dreams, and I'm just thankful for God.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Saeed. So for the audience who are watching, you can write in your questions for the panelists in the Q&A chat box down there. And then if you like one of those questions, you can actually like a question, and that question will go to the top. And so I'll know that a lot of people have that same question, and I'll ask it to the panelists. So actually now, Talar, I'll change the question a little bit to match what the audience wants to know, which is tell us about your first day of after landing in Canada. What was that like?
It's a funny, can say, story, because like when I arrived here in Toronto, I knew nobody. I was alone with my husband. So we landed, and there was nobody to pick, like even no sponsor, no one. So we just decided to go and like rent somewhere just to stay in. So we found a hotel nearby and went and stayed there for roughly a month up until one of the real estate agent helped us to find the place that we could continue living. So it was kind of like, okay, I was perfectly happy. So that we finally arrived Canada, but kind of like being alone and challenge all the difficulties at the very first stage without having any assistance made everything even more challenging for me. But everything had gone, and we're okay now. Yes.
Thank you for sharing that, Talar. Hanan, would you like to tell us about your first day?
Sure. So for me, the experience was a little bit different because I was the only child who spoke English at the family, and I come from a big family, 9 people. So when we came to Canada, I remember the first day we arrived like at 3 a.m. It was a very cold February in 2016. I was ready to experience the winter, but not that much because, like, of course, it's different. So when I arrived, I was stressed because my parents were worried. They had no idea what is Canada. They're coming to the unknown. And I was the person who convinced them and who basically forced them to come to Canada. So, and I was at that time 17 years old. So
you get the idea to come to Canada?
They didn't know what is Canada. And for them, I was working in Turkey and I was supporting my family. I was the only who spoke the language. And I knew the system there. As refugees, we were not really accepted. We were navigating the systems, whether education or employment. So of course, coming to a new country like Canada, where Canadians are welcoming and are supporting us, I want that to happen. And then I talked to my parents. They refused, and then they were like, "Okay, let's see." So it was a challenge for me to tell them, "Hey, you will like it one day." And we came. 17. So I was under 18.
And you made that decision for
I did. Yeah, I did make that decision. So we arrived in February 20th or something. And then we arrived to the airport at 3 a.m. And again, like I was the only child who spoke English. So I was doing the translation if needed. I see them worried, but at that time, what I wanted to do, I wanted to show them like, hey, it's okay. And what I did in my first day, I started to talk to people in the airport. And there where I met one of my best friends. His name is Alex. And it was like, where are you from? And I'm like, I just came now. I'm from Syria, but I lived in Turkey. And I was asking him a lot of questions. I was so curious. I wanted to know about everything. I was asking him about the weather, about how do I go to school? Can I do this here? Can I do this here?
Where did you meet Alex?
At the airport. Like when I arrived, and we're still like good friends until today. So I asked him a lot of questions, and I remember he gave me his number and his email address on a piece of paper, and he said, because I didn't have a phone on me, he said, call me when you reach your home. And I didn't have a home when I came here because like I had to go stay in the hotel. So we went to the hotel, and I was trying to connect with someone because I was stressed. I don't know nobody. I have no family here, and my parents do. I called him since I arrived, and I was like, Alex, come here. We have questions. And he came, and then I started to ask him questions and my parents. And I think that gave my parents the sense of relief that at least we know someone now that we can ask questions. And Yeah, and at least we can ask questions during the when we were at the hotel. I was meeting a lot of people like you, Bayan, like who were involved and volunteering in the hotel and connecting with newcomers. So that was my first day in Canada.
Wow, that's a very touching story, and it's so wonderful that you're still good friends with Alex. It's people like Alex who were part of the really warm and beautiful Canadian welcome of Syrian newcomers, which made this whole experience so like heartwarming for all of us.
For sure.
And that brings me to my next question, kind of related, which is, what did you know about Canada before arriving? And what's one thing that surprised you about Canada after you arrived? Mathew, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. To be honest, I didn't know much other than what I knew from pop culture, from watching movies and TV shows and stuff like that. I knew that it was really cold and there's a lot of snow here. I knew that people said sorry a lot. I knew that Justin Bieber and Drake were from Canada. That's about it. I didn't really know much. What surprised me? I would say, I don't know if this goes for everyone in Canada, but when I arrived in Calgary, it surprised me how calm and quiet it was. The streets were very quiet compared to where I'm from and way less crowded. And it surprised me how clean the streets were, especially here in the suburbs. It's extremely clean here. I think Calgary is one of the cleanest cities in the world. So yeah, that's it.
Nice. Saeed, what about you? What did you know about Canada? You didn't want to come here at first, so what was in your mind about Canada that made you hesitant? And then what surprised you when you came here?
So the first thing was that I don't speak any English, like zero, like nothing. And second, the weather. When I see snow in the TV, I was like, God, like we live here and it's so cold. What about if like half meter, like 70 centimeters of snow, like a meter of snow? Like what can I do? And the third thing is like it's like America, and like we don't really speak the same language, we don't have the same culture, we don't have anything similar. But when I came here, I was surprised of like people here are like I visited a lot of places in Canada and like helpful. Like helpful is the word that I can describe everyone here. Like in everything. Like wherever you go, whenever you're lost, like you can't be lost at all. You can just ask and everyone will be happy to answer you with a big smile, and which is like making me like really better. And motivation, like a lot of motivation. When I came here, it was pretty hard for me. The second months that were like really hard for me. I couldn't do anything at all, and like I've met friends, and even I couldn't speak English. They had to do like even like sign language or like translation, anything.
Yes.
What I can explain is like helpful is the most word I can just say to everyone here.
Yeah. So and you're in Halifax, which really is one of the most beautiful cities,
I
and
know
well known
and
for very friendly people. So
everyone is friendly here, and
that's
they
lovely.
they mostly know each other, but like they're friendly, and yeah.
Thank you, Saeed. Hanan, this question is from the audience. What are your dreams and aspirations after having arrived in Canada, say for the next 5 years?
Okay, for the next 5 years. I'd say because I'm currently like super involved in different initiatives and projects, and I'm currently studying politics and governance and law. So I've been doing a lot of work with nonprofit organizations, private sectors. Thank you, Craig. I see that comment now for the Prime Minister. Of course, like I will always advocate for women in politics. So I'm currently doing my undergrad at Rice University, and I'm also working for the Syrian Canadian Foundation. I would say in 5 years, I would see myself still working in the same field. So probably running for an office one day, or maybe going for law school. But I see myself super involved in politics because I'm so passionate. I know I have a story, and I want to change a lot in our systems and have more women and refugees women engaged in politics. But also I'm super interested to work with youth across the country, and that's why I run now a collective. It's called BAM, stands for Books, Art and Music Collective, and we work with newcomers, we work with Indigenous, we work with people of color, Black youth, LGBT communities. We work with all people from different cultures and backgrounds and engage them in civics and communities, and help them to navigate the system to get jobs and like to be able to continue their education through creative spaces and through the arts. So I will definitely be able to continue working at BAM, and also we're preparing to launch a lot of projects and initiatives in the upcoming new year. So follow us on social media at BAM Collective, and you will learn more about our goals.
Hanen is one of those individuals who has more than 24 hours in her day. That's what I think, because she gets so much done. She's part of so many initiatives. Since the day she landed here, I think she's been, starting things and joining things and volunteering and working. So definitely, if you follow her social media, you will be entertained. Thank you, Hanen. Talar, would you like to tell us a little bit more? You spoke to us about how your career was disrupted and your dreams. So now that you're here in Canada and hopefully found some stability back into your life, what are your aspirations for the next few years?
For me, for sure, to become a successful lawyer here in Ontario, to get my license, and just like
How far are you in this journey?
Pardon me?
How far along are you in becoming a lawyer?
Hopefully next year, in 2021, hopefully. Yes.
That's amazing.
I'm almost there. Yeah, I'm almost there.
Wow, that's great. And Roula, what are your aspirations for the next 5 years?
Well, first of all, Hanen and Talar, I'm really proud to hear about your motivation and inspiration for the coming 5 years. It's really great as women refugees to really see that we can make a change in our new home, Canada, which is really a message that I always try to advocate for, or like encourage newcomers. I mean, I don't know if I'm still newcomers. I've been here for almost 4 years now, but it's the message that I always try to pass to people. So for me, as I'm a humanitarian worker, I work for crisis affected people, I would say, not only like across the board. So I see myself, I'm really working to join the Global Affair Canada's GAC team and advocate and work for children and women around the world. So not only Syria, but like everywhere where, we have a lot of crises around the world. So I would really love to be part of the change in all means.
That is a wonderful aspiration, Roula. I wish you best of luck with that. We're actually almost running out of time. Time just flew, and we have so many more questions, but we'll take one from the chat box, from the audience. Rania would like to ask you guys, what individual lessons and reflections would you like to share with us? So especially, I would say, advice for others who are just arriving here in Canada that might be tuning in today. What would you like to tell them? Mathew, would you like to start?
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to say that I'm so proud of everybody on this panel. I mean, just hearing your stories, I'm just proud to say that I'm a Syrian refugee just based on what everybody is doing. And good luck to all of you on everything. And just to answer your question, to all the new Canadians, I would say, first of all, it gets better. When you first arrive here, it's always hard, and with time, it always gets better. And I would also say, don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do based on where you're from or your past experiences. This place gives you a fresh start, a clean slate, and we have to take advantage of the privilege that we have, that we're here in Canada, in a country that is safe, a country that rewards hard work, a country that provides so many different opportunities to everyone. And no matter your race, your gender, your ethnicity, or your religion, if you put in the hard work, you will make it big. You will achieve great things in this country. History has shown again and again what refugees and immigrants can and have achieved in this country and will continue to do so in the future. So that's my advice for everyone.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was so touching and wonderful. And I agree with you. I am so proud of all of you. I've met so many wonderful Syrian Canadians that have contributed so much to their communities and done so well here. Sadly, we're out of time. I wish I had another 2 hours to chat with you guys, but we are out of time. So I will hand it back to Daryl.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. That was a very inspirational, very amazing panel. I have to ask you, Brian, while we're doing a technical change and bringing on stage the segment 2 panelists, I have to ask you, you've been helping Syrian Canadians when they arrive for many years now. Does the views and perspectives shared by the 5 panelists today kind of reflect and align with what you're hearing from helping other families as well?
Yes, I think so. One thing I always say about, Syrian newcomers is that they're very diverse. There's so many different types of Syrians. In Syria itself has a very diverse peoples. So while that's true, there are a lot of the themes that were brought up today are things that I hear all the time. We didn't have a chance to talk more about the challenges faced during the integration. But yes, I think that a lot of what I heard today is along the lines of what I hear from a lot of the newcomers we work with. Great.
And I remember you telling me that you were inspired to start the Syrian Canadian Foundation right around the time when 2015, 2016, when this first cohort of refugees started arriving in Canada. Tell me about that initial startup period, the growing pains, and where you are today.
So yeah, we all started as volunteers at the temporary housing where the Syrian refugees were were living, and we felt that there was such a big need for an organization like ours that can kind of bridge between the really warm Canadian welcome and all of the community support that was pouring out, and between that and between the Syrian Canadians, and just kind of doing a lot of connecting work. So we formed our organization at that same time. We're celebrating today the 5-year anniversary of the welcome of Syrian refugees in Canada, but it's also the 5-year anniversary of the Syrian Canadian Foundation.
Great, and I understand you're planning something special to celebrate that 5-year anniversary in January.
Yes, we are. We have an event coming up on January 14. We're very excited about it. There's the poster for the event. We haven't had an event in so long because of COVID, and we love events at the Syrian Canadian Foundation. So this is coming up January 14. It's going to be a celebration of the welcoming of Syrian refugees in Canada, and also the anniversary of our organization. And it's going to be a really fun program with some musical performances, some special guests that I can't announce yet, and a lot of exciting things. So if you can go to our event page, there's an Eventbrite page, there's an event page on Facebook. We will be posting announcements in the next few days about all of the exciting guests that we're going to have in this event.
Wonderful. Bayan, I want to thank you. And everyone doesn't know this, but this is the first ever event that you've moderated. You did a wonderful job. You're a natural, and thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Daryl.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our second segment. And again, for those of you who have joined us a bit late, my name is Daryl Pinto, and I'm the co-chair of the Refugee Jobs Agenda Roundtable, going to be the moderator for segment 2. We have 4 amazing Canadians who are going to help me reflect on the experience of 25,000 refugees, not only getting them here, but once they got here, helping resettle them. We have the Honorable Ratna Amidvar, Independent Senator for Ontario, the Honorable John McCallum, PC, former Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Dr. Wendy Sukier, founder and director of the Diversity Institute at Ryerson University, and Dr. Leah Hamilton, professor at the Bissett School of Business at Mount Royal University, and also one of the co-editors of a recent book called A National Project, Syrian Refugee Resettlement in Canada. So welcome all the panelists, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today on this very special anniversary. of, I think it's 5 years to the day that the first plane left Syria to bring, the first batch of the cohort of 25,000 refugees to Canada. So I'd like to start maybe by way of introduction. John, I'm going to ask you to maybe reflect and think back to 5 years ago and share with us, how the Syrian crisis impacted you, how it came across your radar, how did you become involved?
Well, I am delighted to celebrate this 5-year anniversary. It's probably in my whole life the best opportunity I've ever had to help so many people. And I look back at it with great fondness. I think I remember very well this day 5 years ago. 3 of us got in an airplane with the Prime Minister to fly to Pearson Airport, where we met the first batch of Syrian refugees. And it had been a huge amount of work to get to that point. So it was something of a celebration. And I also remember 2 days later when I went to meet the first Syrian refugees arriving in Montreal. That was also a wonderful occasion. So it was a huge amount of work, but I think it went very well. And I'm delighted to join you and Ratna and others to celebrate the occasion.
John, some of the panelists on the first panel shared that, the first view of snow was something that was quite shocking to them when they arrived here. Do you remember those, when you went to the airport at Pearson and in Montreal, was it a snowy day?
Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to those panelists. I think they were very honest. They didn't necessarily want to come here in the first place, some of them, but I think they've all adjusted very well. And they told the future newcomers that it gets better. So when I met the Syrian refugees, they were a bit tired. They just arrived, but I think they were very happy to be here. I don't remember, to tell you the truth, whether there was snow or not, but I do remember thinking that they all seemed very happy to have arrived, even though they were a bit tired. And in Montreal, it was especially good because these were privately sponsored refugees. And after they completed the formalities, they went out into a second huge room and all the sponsors were there. So we got to meet the sponsors meeting the refugees for the first time, and they were all very happy to meet each other.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Ratna, how about you? 5 years ago, tell us about what you remember. Ratna, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Sorry. Unmute shall be my name forever. I do this all the time. I apologize, colleagues. And thank you, Daryl, for organizing this. I've been looking forward to this because it's sort of made me remember what happened 5 years ago and string the bits of my memory together. And as I remember it, early in 2015, a small group of us, and Wendy is here, she was in that group, we got together and we started to throw around a question amongst ourselves. The times were very different, the context was very different, but there were these millions of people streaming out of Syria with nowhere to go. And we looked back in history and we remembered the enormous outpouring of compassion and support that Canadians demonstrated during the Indo-Chinese crisis, and where we brought thousands of people to Canada. And we asked ourselves a simple question. If we were able to do that then, can we repeat it again today? And there was a resounding yes. And that's how, our small citizen movement started. It morphed into, Lifeline Syria. And I remember the bits and pieces quite vividly. We created our movement. It wasn't an organization. It was a ragtag group of people saying, we're going to bring, Syrian refugees to Toronto. And of course, at that time, you will remember Stephen Harper was in government. And the Harper government was very sort of grudging in its approach to the refugees. And we were in an election period, and a young leader of the Liberal Party, who is now our prime minister, went on TV and said, if I get elected, we will bring 25,000 Syrian refugees to Canada. And I will never forget that. That gave our little Toronto group liftoff, because it anchored our work in a statement. Of course, the Liberals went on to form the government, and I think the rest is sort of history. But we needed both this movement of citizens and the government's willingness to do what it had to do. And, you know, John plays a big role in this. You know, lots of credit to him, lots of credit to the public servants who did the almost impossible. And I looked at that date when the Prime Minister said by the end of the year, and I rolled my eyes. I said, this ain't going to happen. And you know, to tell the story truthfully, it didn't really happen. John needed 2 more months to make that commitment, but boy, did that ever work. So that was the story of where we all started.
Wonderful. Wendy, Ratna mentioned it started with a ragtag group of citizens, and you were one of those, you know, citizens in that small group. Can you share your memories of 5 years ago?
Yeah, well, I remember Ratna inviting me to join, and I said, yeah, I'll help, but I don't want to come to any meetings. I was the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Ryerson, and I had given Ratna refuge when she left Mathew, and she set up the GDX at Ryerson. But I had sponsored a Vietnamese family when I was at university. My father had been a refugee, and it was sort of paying it forward. So I remembered what the experience was like. I mean, we knew nothing, and we had no support. One of us had a car. The Tanwen was pregnant. We had to like support her through her pregnancy, figure out how to get them into English classes. It was really one of those kind of crazy things that you wouldn't do if you actually knew what was involved in doing it. So for me, the idea of doing it again made a lot of sense. And I remember, and Ratna, sorry, Senator Ahmedvar, you will recall, I believe that you launched Lifeline Syria on about June 16th, something like that. I remember at Costi, and there was a press conference, and John Tory came, even though he had been told not to say that he was supportive. And the audacious goal was sponsoring 1,000 Syrian refugees in Toronto. And I went home and I emailed the president of Ryerson, Sheldon Levy, and I said, you know, this is what Senator Ahmed, well, she wasn't a senator then, this is what Ratna and I did today. And, you know, the mayor was there, and he said, what are we doing? And I said, oh, and I emailed back and I said, well, we're going to organize, and we're going to privately sponsor some Syrian refugees. Let's see, we'll sponsor 10 families, I said. And within an hour, we had that sort of agreed, and it was, you know, the Ryerson University Lifeline Syria Challenge, and Ratna said she'd take a family and she'd get some of her friends lined up and the other executive and so on. And we got a bunch of students to help with the outreach, because the way that we justified it was a student experiential learning project at Ryerson. And it was. So then we were rolling along. We we raised the money. We're set up within a month. And then at the beginning of September, the picture of Alan Kurdi hit the media. And over a weekend, we had set up a crowdfunding platform and so on. That weekend, we got $1 million, and we had people standing up and saying they'd give us $600,000 and support 20 families, and on it went. And we ended up raising $5 million. The other universities joined in, and we sponsored 100 Syrian families, 400 people altogether. And our first family actually arrived in October, because we had collaborated with the Catholic Church with ORAT and for some reason, the first family came in around Halloween. It was a family of 14, and we had to settle them in Picton, Ontario, because that was the only place we could find a house big enough for them. But it was a trip, and I would say, you know, like Mr. McCollum, that you know, it's probably one of the most meaningful things I was ever involved in.
Wonderful, Wendy. Now, Leah, you're calling in from Calgary. Were you in Calgary 5 years ago? And tell us about your memories of that time.
Sure, yes, I was in Calgary. And let me just start by thanking you, Daryl, and all of the panelists here today, including the amazing Syrian refugees that we heard from. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I guess I come from this from a bit of a different perspective as a researcher. And back in 2015, I had been working with newcomers and refugees through my program of research for several years by that point. And I was doing some work in the area of refugee resettlement. And like everyone else here, I was paying close attention to the war in Syria. And I do remember a lot of the photos that emerged during that period and some of the deep kind of reflection I was doing, holding my then toddler. And, you know, shortly after the arrival of the cohort that we're celebrating tonight, I did become kind of directly involved as a researcher and started working on a project looking at Syrian refugees' information needs, working with some community partners here in Calgary as well as in London, Ontario. And then eventually, as you said, Daryl, at the beginning, I co-edited a book with my colleagues, Louisa Veronis from the University of Ottawa and Margaret Walton Roberts from Wilfrid Laurier University called A National Project. And this is a co-edited volume that features 13 research projects that examined the experiences of Syrian refugees, receiving communities, and a wide range of stakeholders who are involved in this resettlement effort. And then, like many of you, I also became involved in some more personal ways, but that wasn't until 2019.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. Now, I quickly want to remind the audience that this is interactive. So if you want to type your questions into the Q&A tab, if you're watching on Zoom, or on the chat box, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll be happy to relay the questions. And you can also vote on questions. So if you like a particular question, vote it. The more votes a question receives, the more likely it is I'm going to ask the question. So John, I'm going to come back to you and ask you, in the 5 years since 2015, you've probably witnessed lots of examples of Canadians embracing Syrian families and helping integrate into their local communities. Can you share one particular example that sticks out in your mind?
Okay, I'll do that. But first, I just want to make another comment. And I think what really struck me during this process was how much Canadians came together to cooperate. It was amazing. Like, for example, I had to get the provinces to agree to accept refugees. Well, they oversubscribed. The provinces wanted to take more refugees than were available. The civil servants, they volunteered to go out to Jordan and Lebanon, and we had fantastic help from the military. The people in Toronto and elsewhere across the country who specialize in settling people worked in overdrive, but they didn't complain, and they did a fantastic job. So I think across the country, and the business community came out and gave money. So all across the country, there was huge cooperation. And, you know, I don't know if that can always be repeated, but the feeling of the times was one that we were in this together. It wasn't perfect, and maybe we'll come to that. It wasn't perfect, but it was very good. And what really struck me is how much all parts of Canadian society came together to help out. Now, I didn't answer your question, but I wanted to get that out.
Well, I think that was an important ingredient, a critical ingredient in terms of how quickly we were able to resettle 25,000 refugees, John. But in terms of
I think the reason we could do that, well, we pulled every stop we could to make it happen. But one thing that helped us a lot was that fairly early on, the top security people, the head of the RCMP, the head of CSIS, they said this is safe. Because one of the challenges is Canadians might think these people are terrorists, these people are unhealthy. And one of the things we did is we made absolutely sure that each and every single refugee was tested for security and tested for health before that person arrived in the country. And so I think that put Canadians at ease, because otherwise they might have been nervous. Who are these people coming to this country? And that's one reason we could not possibly have done it by the end of the year. We needed the extra 2 months because we had to set up all those facilities outside of Canada to test all of those people before allowing them to come to Canada. And it was touch and go whether we'd make it in time, but we did, thanks to all the hard work of many thousands of people who stepped up.
Absolutely. Now, Ratna, on the earlier panel, some of the refugees shared that, my first day arriving at the airport, what that experience was like for them. Either yourself, as you did mention, you did sponsor some refugee families, either yourself or stories that you've heard about Canadians receiving refugees at the airport. I mean, people like John and the Prime Minister certainly were there, but everyday families were there as well. And can you share one particular story that stood out for you?
Well, I mean, the particular story that still stands out for me then and now is the story of 20 ragtag citizens coming together and forming a sponsorship group. And it was called Team Everest because it was a very long climb, because our first family that we sponsored, I think, Wendy, it was the second family that arrived in Toronto. It was a family of 13. And frankly, we were daunted by the task. We couldn't even find a house to rent them in. And they were arriving by some miracle. They were arriving a month earlier than we expected them to. And we were pulling our hair out. What are we going to do? And I was at a meeting and I just sort of threw it out to a group of 40 people and said, I think the meeting was about infrastructure, something completely different. And I said, I'm having this real challenge. I don't know what to do because, 11 people are arriving. We have no place to put them up in. We don't want to separate the families because they don't speak any English. They've got kids ranging from 3 to 16. That wouldn't be the right thing to do. And out of the blue, I get an email from someone I don't know, who knows someone else, who knows someone else. And this wonderful person says to me, I'll go a week earlier on holiday and here are the keys to my house. The kindness of strangers completely overwhelmed me. I went to the hospital to sign up the family for OHIP and get their shots. And I was just sitting there, again, feeling somewhat overwhelmed. And strangers came up to me and put $50 in my hands because they knew this was a sponsorship situation. So, I think the sponsorship experience, as much, and it absolutely helped the refugees that were sponsored first, but I think not far behind is how it helped us become more human and more humane and become more compassionate. And what I learned from the resiliency of the family, I remember Mahmoud, he didn't speak 4 words of English. He arrived at the airport. We went to meet them in this room where sponsors were finding families and families were finding sponsors. He looks at me and he says, "You Ratna?" I said, "Yes." And he says, the first 4 words he said to me, he says, "I want work." We had to hold him back because he didn't speak English. Today, he earns $30 an hour. They've got a home in Brampton. Everybody's well settled. As John said, it's not a perfect story, but it is an incredibly uplifting one for everyone involved.
So true. Wendy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many of those stories. It really was astonishing. And I'll just, I think there are 2 examples that come to mind. One was the very first family. And I had pulled in a lot of personal favors to kind of get the initial groups going. But the first family, 14 people, a couple, their mother and their 11 children, one of whom had a fairly severe disability. And as I said, there was a home for the deaf in Picton, and there was space, and someone had provided a home and so on. So come to the airport, put them in the van, driving, 2.5 hours or whatever it was. They arrive in Picton. They realize that they're not in Toronto. They want to leave, right? So our first family that arrives, everyone's excited, catastrophe. That got resolved. Then, you know, small town, hadn't seen people in hijab before, whatever. We had to actually provide protection to the family because the locals were showing up at their door at all hours of the day with casseroles and gifts. And it became this incredible community thing in this very small town. And the final thing about that story is the oldest son took over one of the only fishing businesses in that community that would have gone out of business had he not basically taken it over. And there's so many examples, to Ratna's point, of you know, Syrian refugees actually creating jobs because of the work ethic and 3 words of English, and they wanted to do something useful. So there are lots of those success stories, I think, as well. And that's why this notion of, you know, what we're giving versus what we're getting when we bring in refugees and immigrants generally, I think is something we have to communicate over and over and over to the rest of Canada.
Right. Now, Leah, the point that Wendy just made, you know, it's been the strength of Canada historically to bring in refugees and newcomers and immigrants and integrate them and become a more powerful country. In your research toward the book that just got published, the National Project, what John talked about was processes were expedited, the kindness of strangers that Ratna mentioned, and people showing up at all hours of the day with casseroles and Picton, I mean, are good examples of that collective coming together. In your research, did you find that that was unusual in this period of resettling 25,000, or is this kind of the norm for Canada?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by sharing a personal story. And I think this is very much the norm. And one of the most compelling examples for me is thinking about a close friend of mine who spent almost every day for a few weeks sitting in a grade 1 classroom because he was trying to help a Syrian refugee boy adjust to school while he was having a hard time. And he really recognized the importance of kids' integration. And I mean, the sacrifices he made in this regard were really profound. And he did this, you know, not to have a photo up on social media, but because he cared and he wanted to change one life. And I think he did. And I would say that I think speaking of schools, the teachers and staff at schools have been amazing. I've seen teachers come to refugee kids' soccer games in the summer. When we transitioned to at-home learning, teachers in Calgary were driving all over the city to deliver packages to Syrian refugees, families, and even here in Calgary, I've seen a soccer league who's waived thousands of dollars of fees, and everyone on a team, the players, the parents, the coaches come together to say, you know, how can we support this child in his love for soccer? And I think that's amazing. And to bring it back to the book that I worked on with Louisa and Margaret, I would say that we you know, this was a national effort, and it wouldn't have happened without a warm welcome from communities and without Canadians stepping up from coast to coast to assist with these efforts.
So Leah, it sounds like Canadians did everything really well. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but as best as could be done. And I think many Syrian refugees today, and we heard 5 of them on the earlier panel, really their lives were positively impacted. But looking back, I mean, are there things Canada could have done differently or better?
Yes, I mean, I'll speak to some of the things that Louisa and Margaret and I talk about in the book, which is that, I mean, I do think the timeline that was proposed by the Trudeau government was a bit ambitious. And I mean, it was good to bring people here quickly, but I think a more realistic timeline may have led to a bit better planning and coordination. So it may have avoided organizations sort of having to walk away from other projects or some of the strained relationships that emerged in a few communities. And I think even on the earlier panel, we heard Mathew talk about his family only having, I think it was 5 days to prepare, or 4 days to say goodbye to friends and family, and how challenging that was. So I think a little bit more time may have allowed for more realistic expectations on the part of Syrian refugees and some of the actors in Canada. But some of you may disagree with me on that one. And I think,
disagree. I do disagree. We can have a discussion about that. I disagree completely, but
okay.
let's go there. Yeah.
Well, so do I.
Well, maybe John, why don't you disagree out loud?
Well, look, I can see those points, and people were stressed and people were strained, but they realized the importance of the work. And my challenge was, I was fighting against having to get it done by December 31st instead of February 29th. It was a leap year. And so that would have been chaotic. That would have been impossible. That would have been a mess. And I always used to say, it's more important to do it well than to do it fast. But I think the point that it was fast was important, because it was a deadline, a hard deadline for all the public servants and for everybody. And they all knew what the deadline was, so they had to work to it. And so I think I would agree with you, if we'd had to do December 31st, that was undoable. But the end of February was doable, and I think it was the right move. But you asked me about things that went wrong. I wouldn't mention the timing of the process, but I will tell you one thing that went wrong. And that is that after we'd reached February 29th, the deadline date when we succeeded, we shut down the operations in Jordan and Lebanon too fast. And so that was a mistake, because as a consequence, those who still had privately sponsored refugees to come, we lacked the capacity to bring them in quickly enough. So as I used to say, I was probably the only immigration minister in the world who was criticized because he couldn't bring in refugees fast enough. In a way, that's a good criticism to have, because most countries in the world, the public were pushing governments not to accept refugees. They were pushing me to let them in faster, because it was our fault we'd slowed down. So that was a negative. It wasn't the end of the world. We tried to speed it up somewhat, but if I had to do it over again, we would have left those facilities open longer so we could expedite the remaining refugees.
Wendy, it looks like you want to jump in.
I just wanted to say, except that you sent poor Arif Farani in to meet with the irate sponsors. I remember that, watching that at a distance as they were shrieking, "Where are our refugees?" But I teach in entrepreneurship, so that's where I come from. My view is your reach has to exceed your grasp, and I think that setting, and I say this because today we launched the 50-30 challenge. That's another hairy, audacious goal. I actually think that government often plays it too safe. And I think there are two examples when I think about government innovation. Yeah, it's messy, but the Syrian refugee example, and then some of the programs that the government in response to COVID, where it did in weeks what normally would have taken bureaucrats years to do. Yeah. I actually think that we need to learn from these examples of government's ability, when there's really, a fire under their feet, to move quickly and do things that people think are impossible. And for me, I agree it wasn't perfect. It put a lot of pressure on people. I had people working overnight processing things, and certainly, it was far from perfect. But from my point of view, in this instance, you delay, people die. With COVID, you delay, people die. And so You know, I had a real sense of urgency, and I would never let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough when, you know, people's lives are at stake.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more.
And Ratna, anything
Poor
to add?
Arif. Poor little Arif, though. He was so traumatized.
And Wendy, for the benefit of the audience, Arif is who?
Arif Farani is my member of parliament, and I think that he was Minister McCallum's parliamentary secretary, perhaps, at the time.
That's right. That's right. He did a great job.
He did.
But I guess I sent him into the Lions, did I?
You did. You did.
Great. And Ratna, I mean, looking back, is there something else that you would have pointed to as we could have done this a little differently?
Well, first of all, I you know, Canada is, and I look at the Canadian personality a little differently because I'm in many ways I'm still an outsider, although not really anymore. But I appreciate the fact that we're a risk-averse society, and it was thrilling to see us embrace risk in the way we did. And Wendy is spot on. It was, you know, I always felt it was a stretch goal, and we had to stretch ourselves in 1,001 ways. And John talked about the many arrangements with provinces and the RCMP. But what I also witnessed was the stretch that citizens took. And these weren't, you know, traditional church-going, although there were many religious organizations that stepped forward. These were groups of people, you know, the local dog walking club, the choir, the group of accountants. There were institutions involved, like Ryerson University. Schools started to sponsor. So it was a perfect pairing of aspiration and a swelling of empathy grounded in action. It was a nation building moment. And I think about nation building a lot because of the work I do. You know, and I think about when people talk about nation building, they talk about the railroad east to west. And I think that the Syrian refugee movement in Canada was a modern day nation building movement that really pulled us together. Now, there's lots that we could have done better. But I'm not one to let perfection get in the way of good. If we were to do it again, I'd say, let's grasp, let's reach, let's make some mistake, but let's save lives in doing so. Now, you know, there are lots of shades to this. I felt it was a little awkward that we made such a difference between government-assisted refugees and privately sponsored refugees. I think that's an artificial construct. Both groups are refugees, and I actually think that every refugee should be matched with a sponsor, because we know from the evidence tells us that a private sponsor will extend his or her social capital, and that's what made the glue. That's what made the magic. So I would wish, you know, and I'm still in the business of creating legislation. So I think it's really important for the Canadian government to retool some of their programs and processes coming out of the experience, the wonderful experience that we've had with Syrian refugees. And I'm not sure that has happened.
The Syrian, in terms of timing, the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011. And Canada's response, 25,000 refugees, happened in 2015. 4 years passed before that response happened. Wendy, you touched on the picture of Alan Kurdi washed up on the beach that happened just a few months before Canadians' response. It really amped up the urgency and Canadian sort of emotional response to the plight of Syrians. I mean, looking back, was that the catalyst, or were there other factors that came together to really help Canadians embrace Syrians?
You know, there's the sweetness and light about all of this, and there's the dark side. And I recognize the criticisms that we were focusing on this particular population of refugees, and this is language that some people use because they're just like us, meaning that, you know, they weren't from Africa, and I do think that that part of the reason that picture of Alan Kurdi killed people, and you know, I have so many stories about, you know, guys showing up at my office with $500 in tears saying I was on the wrong side of this issue, take my money. But it looked like a little North American boy with his running shoes and his shorts and his t-shirt. And, you know, we were criticized, quite honestly, a lot for singling out Syrian refugees and ignoring so many others. And my view on that was simply, you know, if we can help some, we'll help them. And I'm sorry that we can't help everybody, but there's an appetite to move forward on this now. Let's do it. But I actually agree with Ratna that I think the lesson in this is the financial investments of the private sponsors are important, and they leverage the investments of government. But the human capital, the social capital, are really what made the difference for many, many of these people. And we heard it in the first panel. You know, I knew one person, I met one person at the airport, and that made all the difference to me and my family. I do think that we have an opportunity to kind of leverage things in much more innovative ways. But there are some things about this whole movement that were problematic, and I recognized it. But again, you know, for me, it was a chance to do something rather than nothing. So
look, if I may make one point, you said the Civil War broke out in 2011 and the help didn't begin till 2015. Well, no doubt it was partly that photograph, but at the risk of sounding like a partisan, 2011 was the year the Liberals did terribly in the election and we had a Conservative majority. 2015 was the year the Liberals got a majority government. So I don't think it's overly partisan to say that this might have had something to do with the election of a Liberal government, and we were determined to make this happen. So no doubt it was helped by that photograph, but I think the will was there anyway. And you know, I'm not sure we quite achieved this, but I was determined to ensure that the other refugees, the non-Syrian refugees, were not shortchanged by this, and that this was a net increase in refugees. We might not have fully met that target, but that was certainly the intent.
Fair point.
And I also agree that privately sponsored refugees are critical. And one of the many, many, many good things about January 20th, when President Biden is sworn in, is that I think he is committed. The US will finally start to pull its weight, including on the privately sponsored refugees. And if I may make one other point, I don't know if we'll ever replicate exactly what we did with Syrian refugees, but there are certain times are different and you can't repeat exactly the same thing twice. But I'll tell you one other area which I think is promising and I've gotten into recently, which is sponsoring refugees for labor market. And there's a group called Talent Beyond Borders, which I've become a member of the board of. And it's a very simple concept, which I hadn't even thought of when I was immigration minister. But there are thousands or millions of skilled people languishing in refugee camps. And there are Canadian employers desperate for certain kinds of labor they can't get hold of. So why not transfer these people from the refugee camps to Canada as workers? And the government has taken this on. Marco Mendicino has agreed to 500 principal applicants in the next 2 years, which is leading the world. It's a small number, but it's a fledgling baby project. So my hope is that we in Canada kind of led the world or are leading the world on privately sponsored refugees. And we are ahead of Australia and UK, who are currently in the game on the labor-sponsored refugees, and hopefully the US will join. But I do think this is an important additional mechanism. It's not a substitute. You have to get that straight. It's not a substitute at all. It's an addition but I think that could play a significant role going forward. And by the way, we've enrolled in your 3060 program.
Wonderful, John. And I certainly hope the best for this pilot. It's Canada's way to innovate in a way that it always has historically. Leah, the point's been made by many of the panelists that this mechanism we have in Canada, the sponsoring families that were matched with the arriving refugees, Ratna used the word glue. It was the successful glue that helped to make this ambitious experiment work. In your research and in the book, I'm assuming you've spoken to many families who did the sponsoring. What was your findings in the research that you did there?
Good question. We do have one chapter on sponsorship agreement holders. And I would say that I think IRCC actually did a really great job of having a robust sort of performance measurement plan in place from the very beginning. And they've been really transparent with those data. And often when they are reporting on the outcomes for Syrian refugees, they do break it down by government-assisted refugees versus privately sponsored refugees. So those outcomes are all publicly available. And we do know that privately sponsored refugees have quite positive outcomes. But to some extent, I mean, the demographic profile of privately sponsored refugees does also look different than the profile of government-assisted refugees. But I would agree with what everyone has said today around private sponsors sort of sharing their social capital and their networks, and how important that is for resettlement of refugees. And when we look at the new levels plan that Minister Mendocino released fairly recently at the end of October, we can see that we have pretty ambitious targets with Canada is aiming to bring in about 60 to 70,000 refugees in each of the next 3 years. And when you look at the numbers, the target is about twice as many privately sponsored refugees than government-assisted refugees. But I really think, Minister McCallum's notion about this needs to be built on the principle of additionality is really important here.
Yeah.
Now, Ratna, 2020 has been a year of disruption all over the world, not just here in Canada. We're looking back at 5 years ago, lessons learned from the Syrian refugees resettling here, but going forward, and I'm totally asking you to anticipate because no one will know the answer to this question, but how do you think the next couple of years will unfold with regards to refugees being displaced during this pandemic, and how could Canada respond?
The pandemic has incrementally and drastically worsened the situation of the most vulnerable people, and those are refugees and the internally displaced. The figures are staggering. Close to 70 million people who have been forced to leave their home are either internally displaced or refugees. And let's then think about COVID in this context. I'm looking at, let's say, the Rohingya situation. They're cramped together on an island that may well sink. There's no social distancing there. And I worry enormously about vulnerable populations during the crisis. And I also know that climate change and climate disasters are going to add incrementally to this number of 70 million. So Canada's role in this, we are a middle power. We all recognize that, and there's strength in that. And certainly with the Syrian refugees, we've sort of our brand, our national brand and our global brand, to some extent rests on that narrative that we are talking about here. But with that narrative comes a responsibility. We have a responsibility, I believe, and we should take that responsibility to show the world the way in governance and systems and processes. And I actually think Canada should create a center for excellence on refugees, whether they are here or elsewhere, because we have the capacity to do so, because we are able to test out things. The numbers in Canada are relatively small compared to the rest of the world. relatively small, even though, 50,000 Syrian refugees came. Think about what happened in Germany, where over 1 million arrived. So I think we have the luxury of reflecting, documenting, testing, as John is saying, with talent beyond borders. We have that luxury, and with our brain comes the responsibility to show the world a way. And I think we're in a unique position to do that going forward. Can we save all the refugees in the world by resettling them? No, that's an impractical idea. But what we can do is show the rest of the world the right way to do it.
Look, I completely agree with what Ratna has said, that the world situation is extraordinarily dire. And I think Canada should do whatever we can to improve it. Now we are, the conversation here is almost veered in the direction of saying that every Canadian is a cuddly, immigrant-loving person. That's not quite true. There are quite a lot of opponents to immigration who are out there. But we are better off than most. We don't have any significant political party that is opposed to immigration. The Conservatives did not oppose our latest levels plan, which is a high level. They oppose certain things about it, but not the numbers. So I think we're in a good position. I mean, we're not perfect. We have lots of immigrant-hating people out there, but less than most other countries. So I think we are in a position to lead. And if I may come back to what is maybe the most important issue globally, is the arrival of Joe Biden. And that is absolutely crucial for climate change, which, as you all know, is an existential problem. And it's also crucial for refugees and immigrants, I believe, because I think he's working towards a major role for citizen-sponsored refugees. And I think when you get the US as an ally in these areas, then you're 10 steps ahead. So I think we should work with the Americans to try to encourage them to do the sorts of things we're talking about. And I think we'll have receptive ears for a change, and also do as much as we can ourselves.
Great. So Leah, John just made the point, right? We're not all cuddly, immigrant-loving Canadians here. The majority of us are, but some of us aren't. In the research and in the book that you just published, did you touch on that undercurrent at all? Did that surface in the research?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how, part of the reason that the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Initiative in Canada was so successful is that public attitudes at the time were very supportive of these efforts. As we've heard, the Conservative government in 2015 was running on a platform of resettling 10,000 Syrian refugees, while the Liberal government said, no, we're going to resettle 25,000 by the end of 2015, and the Canadian population said, yes, we want you. And so I think that those positive attitudes really played a huge role in the private sponsorship and in the, community receptivity. And I think we need to kind of remain vigilant about and, take the temperature of public attitudes toward newcomers and refugees in the coming months and years, because we want those positive public attitudes are essential for these types of resettlement efforts.
Leah, we have an audience member just asking you to remind about the name of the book and any details if they wanted to purchase the book. So here's your chance to plug it.
That's a good question for you.
That's a good question. Yeah.
That's very nice. Hopefully it's not one of my family members. No, I'm just kidding. So this is the book. It's called The National Project, Syrian Refugee Resettlement in Canada. And I was really fortunate to work with two amazing co-editors, Louisa Veronis from University of Ottawa and Margaret Walton Roberts from Wilfrid Laurier University. And I believe it is available from McGill Queen's University Press. But thank you for your interest. And we really hope that it was nice to put this together and share some of the lessons that we learned from this incredible resettlement initiative.
Great. Well, I want to start wrapping things up and by way of looking forward. And Wendy, I'm going to start with you. Your work at the Diversity Institute has just been amazing on a number of fronts. But when you think about refugees and Canada's learning from the Syrian experience, the 25,000 and more over the last 5 years, What is your hope going forward?
So I think there are two, maybe three things. And one, I've already talked about it, which is out of the box thinking and innovative approaches to harness public-private partnerships, social capital, and so on, erode barriers between what NGOs do, what the community does, and so on. I think that's one thing. But picking up, we did some research that looked at public attitudes, and one of the things that I think is so very important is to understand that combating Islamophobia and hate and racism, often the response, and we did an analysis of what liberals said, what Tories said, and so on. Often the response of the Liberal government was to invoke human rights and kind of an appeal to humanitarian principles. I would argue that you don't fight hate with reason. You fight hate with empathy. And I think that the biggest lesson from the Syrian refugee experience was the way in which appealing to people's empathy dissolved their fear of difference and Muslims and so on and so forth. And we can actually show that in a lot of the analysis. So I think that really understanding that if we want to shift the public discourse around immigration, refugees, and so on, the business case I also think is really important. I do think that we have to continually reinforce that economic argument. But I also think figuring out how to appeal to people's hearts as well as their minds, super important. And then I think the final thing, which Ratna mentioned, is recognizing that social capital is as important as money when it comes to integrating people, when it comes to, and this is true not just for immigrants and refugees, but for all sorts of people. And we have to find new innovative models. I'm a big fan of community platforms and social innovation and mixing things up in new and interesting ways. And I think we have real opportunities to harness that, especially given how digital we now all are because of COVID. So those would be three things.
John, anything to add to what Wendy's laid out?
Well,
looking forward?
Basically, I agree. By the way, Wendy, I think I misstated your challenge, 50-30 challenge, right? Yeah, I think I said it wrong, perhaps. But I agree with what others have said, and I think I've basically said what I wanted to say, and that is that we should work with the Biden government to hope that they go as far as they can in the directions we want, and we should work on our own government to do as much as it can. In my corner, in my little corner, I'll be probably working mainly on this labor market refugees, and I do think that's a very good supplement which could grow substantially. Now, I totally agree with Leah. It has to be additional, and once it starts to become a substitute, it fails. But I don't think there's a danger of that. But I do think that's a way of the future, just as the citizenship-sponsored refugees were before. And I think we're making good progress selling that concept to other countries. So I think part of our mission is a proselytizing or salesmanship to other countries, because we're relatively small, as people have said. So if we can influence others to go in what we think is the right direction to help these tens of millions of people in distress, then I think that's the way we should go.
That's awesome. Ratna, I'll give the last word to you. And I do want to bring up that you were one of the forces that brought many stakeholders together back, I think it was 2015, corporations, governments, as well as settlement agencies to help bring them together in the efficient receiving of the Syrian refugees. But anything you would like to add on a go-forward basis?
I'd like to make an observation, and I think it's important to note that Canada is one of the very few countries where we actually don't have any political party that is explicitly anti-immigration or anti-refugees. There's one individual who tried in the last election and didn't even get his own seat. So that tells us something, whereas in the rest of the world, the rising anti-immigration, anti-refugee sentiment is electing in populists and far-right parties into government. Look at Germany, which has a different electoral system, which is part of their issue. We don't have that system. But one of the remarkable things about our political system is we have not made immigration an election issue, not in the last few years. And everyone holds their breath. I do, certainly. And I say, oh my God, this year in the election, we're going to make it an election issue. And we have not done so. And I think that's with the explicit or implicit agreement of all political parties, because they know that they need to have the public on their side, and the public, the voting public, is in certain parts of the country is more immigrant and refugee concentrated than it used to be. So there are political considerations that play in very well, I think, into the narrative and the brand we have. And I think all of this can change. I admit that, but I think so far we should continue to try and build that positive story without making it a burning, divisive issue as we have seen in other countries. We haven't gone down that road, and for that we should be thankful.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I would like you to stick around for a few minutes while I make some closing announcements. I will say that since 2015, we've had more than 25,000, I think around about 40,000.
40,000, yeah.
Yeah, so this show is appropriately called New Canadians, and these 40,000 plus have just added to the vigor and tenacity of this country. So I will remind the audience that you can catch New Canadians on Omni TV or on YouTube and on their website, where you can sign up for their monthly newsletter. If you want to get any updates about upcoming sessions of Café New Canadians, you can follow their social media on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And I do also want to thank my co-moderator today, Bayan Khatib, Executive Director of the Syrian Canadian Foundation. And just a reminder, you can go to their website to find out more details. They have their 5-year anniversary coming up in January 14th, and a special celebration to mark that day. So John, Wendy, Leah, and Ratna, thank you so much for taking the time to mark this special day. I wish you the very best and stay safe.
Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.